I'll come by for the money tonight. Don't go anywhere. She said it like she always did, like it was already hers. But this time, I didn't respond. I just let the call ring out and watched the screen fade to black. The words echoed anyway. Shannon didn't ask anymore. She informed, like I was a stop on her route, a chore to tick off. I set the phone face down on the table. The checkbook was still open, the new deposit circled in red. I closed it quietly, hands steady, and slid it into the drawer I'd started locking again. The air in the kitchen felt thinner than usual, like the walls were listening. Every month it was the same ritual. My pension would clear. Shannon would call. Half would disappear just until Kyle's bonus comes through or just to cover the insurance. Always just something. And I, like clockwork, would nod or sigh or give in. Not today. The steam from my tea drifted upward in slow curls. Outside, the driveway was empty for now, but I knew the rhythm of her tires on gravel. Knew the way she parked too close to the hedge, slammed the car door like she was still angry about something I couldn't name. This time, I'd made my own call first. Carol from the Elder Protection Office had been calm, professional. She said they could send someone by discreetly just to listen, not to escalate. I told her I wasn't sure what I was ready for. She said, "That's all right. We are." From the kitchen window, I saw the SUV roll up. Shannon stepped out in a navy coat, always sharp, always deliberate. She didn't knock. Just walked to the front door like she owned it. Inside, I stayed still. I glanced at the clock, then at the second mug on the table, the one I'd set out for the visitor I had actually invited. Carol arrived 10 minutes early, her shoes quiet on the porch, her clipboard tucked under one arm. She looked exactly like someone meant to be invisible, if needed, neutral sweater, soft-spoken tone, no perfume. She introduced herself plainly, and I stepped back to let her in. I offered coffee. She accepted. Black, no sugar. We sat at the kitchen table. She glanced at the second mug, the one I'd placed earlier, then back at me. "You said there are regular withdrawals?" I nodded. "Half my pension every month. Always on the 5th. And who initiates the withdrawals?" "My daughter-in-law?" "Shannon. She has power of attorney. I signed it a few years back when I had surgery. It was meant to be temporary." Carol wrote something down. "Do you have copies of the document in the drawer?" I said, motioning to the desk behind me. "I keep everything filed." She asked about bills, groceries, medical costs. I answered honestly. I wasn't destitute, not yet, but I had started counting pills before refills, skipping meat to make the budget last. Still, it wasn't just the money. It was the way Shannon took it, like it was owed. Like I was some loose thread she'd rather snip off than stitch back in. Carol looked toward the hallway. "Is there someone else in the home today?" "No," I said. "But someone's coming." As if summoned, the door opened hard. Shannon's voice followed her before her feet even crossed the threshold. "I'm here, where is it?" She stepped into the kitchen, heels tapping, coat still buttoned. Her eyes landed on Carol. She stopped. "Oh," she said, smile frozen. Halfway. Is something wrong?" Carol didn't answer. "I did. I think I said," turning to Carol. "It's time someone else asked that." The envelope was already sealed when I stepped into the credit union that morning. I had double-checked the contents, my notarized revocation of power of attorney, signed the day before at the courthouse annex. The woman at the front desk didn't ask why. She just directed me to a man in a navy suit behind a desk near the back window. His name was Peter. He read the document carefully, nodded once, and said, "We can take care of this immediately, Ms. Ward." I didn't cross my legs or fidget in my chair. I sat upright, spine tall, fingers folded calmly in my lap. There was no tremble in them, no hesitation. Peter made a few quiet clicks on his keyboard, printed out forms, passed them across the desk. "We'll lock access to your current accounts," he said, "and I'll help you open a new one in your name only. You'll also want to notify Social Security." "I've already filled out the SSA forms," I said. They're in the envelope." He raised his eyebrows, slightly surprised, maybe impressed, but said nothing. He only took the papers and kept going. While he typed, my phone buzzed once, then again, then again. I didn't look. I didn't need to. Shannon had already called 5 times since 8 a.m. By the time I walked out, she'd called 10. Kyle had sent one text. "Why are you making this difficult?" I deleted it without opening it. Peter handed me my new account information and a copy of the revocation receipt. "Everything is official as of today," he said. I thanked him and walked out into the parking lot, the morning sun low behind the trees. There was no music, no applause, no dramatic wind, just my shoes on pavement and my breath coming steady. I opened the car door and sat behind the wheel, holding the folder in my lap like it weighed more than it did. Back home, I slipped the new documents into my file drawer and locked it again. Then I poured myself a cup of tea still warm in the pot. Kyle showed up without calling first. I saw his car from the window parked crooked in the driveway like he hadn't planned to stay long. When I opened the door, he gave me a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. He stood in the kitchen, shifting his weight, hands shoved in his pockets. "You know Shannon's just trying to help?" he said, finally looking at the floor like he was reciting something he didn't quite believe. "I know she helped herself," I said. He sighed. "Mom, you signed the papers." "I did, when I could walk to the bank myself." His head came up, surprise flashing across his face. "It's not like that. It's exactly like that." We spoke in low voices, not to hide the words, but because they carried enough weight on their own. He told me I was being unfair, that Shannon was stressed that I was making things harder than they needed to be. I told him that for 2 years, I'd lived like a visitor in my own life. He didn't argue that point, just rubbed his hands together and glanced toward the front door ready to leave. "I don't want this to be ugly," he said quietly. "She was scared when she found that woman here. Said you made her look like a thief." "I didn't have to," I said. "She did that on her own." For a moment I thought he might soften. But the distance between us had grown thick with all the years he didn't notice me shrinking. "So what?" now he asked. "Now," I said, walking him to the door I keep what's mine. He didn't answer. He just stepped outside, closing the door without looking back. When the house was quiet again, I turned the deadbolt and tested it twice. Then I went to the kitchen, refilled my tea, and stared at the photo of June still taped to the refrigerator. I moved through the house slowly that afternoon, not because I was tired, but because everything needed returning to where it belonged. Not where it was left for convenience, not where Shannon thought it looked better. I took down the bowl of keys she kept by the door and slid it back into the drawer in the entry table. I folded the throw blanket she always left draped across the arm of the couch and tucked it back in the linen basket. And then I stood in front of the refrigerator. The photo was still there, curled at the corners, held up by a faded magnet in the shape of a strawberry. Shannon had taken it down once months ago, said it made the kitchen look cluttered. I'd put it back up after she left and told myself it didn't matter, that no one else needed to see it but me. June, my granddaughter about 7 when the photo was taken, hair tucked behind her ears, cheeks speckled with pink. She was holding a paintbrush in one hand, smiling wide at something off camera. I don't even remember what she was painting, only that it made her glow. I hadn't seen her in nearly 3 years. Not since Shannon's voice started answering the phone for Kyle. Not since letters went unanswered, cards returned unopened. I used to wonder if June had forgotten me. Now I wonder if she was ever allowed to remember. I ran a finger down the edge of the picture, then crossed the room to the side table and pulled out my phone. Elise answered on the second ring. "You up for a short ride tomorrow?" I asked. "You need groceries?" "No. I want to go to the elementary school." She was quiet for a beat. "Art fair?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Then gently she said, "Do you think she'll recognize you?" I looked back at the photo. I think I'll recognize her. The next morning, I laid out a soft blue sweater and found a scarf June had once given me with finger-painted handprints still visible in the corner. I stood in the far corner of the gymnasium, the scent of glue sticks and tempera paint thick in the air. Children's voices bounced off the high walls, some proud, some shy, all echoing with more life than my house had held in years. Tables lined the space, each one displaying paper sculptures, collages, and finger paintings. I scanned the room slowly, taking in each small world until my eyes landed on one. There she was. June stood near the center table, paintbrush in hand, her head bent in concentration. Her hair was longer now, pulled back into a ponytail. She was painting something with wide strokes of blue across a piece of cardboard. I could see it clearly, the way she pressed her tongue into the corner of her mouth when she focused. Just like her grandfather used to. And then I felt it. Shannon. Her perfume reached me before her words did. She stepped into my line of sight with practiced ease, heels clicking like punctuation. "You can't just show up here," she whispered, her smile tight, her eyes anything but. "I didn't come to see you." She held her place a second longer. Then June looked up. I didn't move. I didn't wave or call her name. I just let it happen. June's eyes locked on mine. There was a flicker hesitation maybe. A step back, a glance at Shannon. Then she looked again. Grandma. The word was small, careful. I took a slow step forward and knelt. My knees ached, but I stayed there, arms open. I didn't say anything. There was no explanation I could give that would make up for lost years. But she came anyway. June leaned into me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders, and I held her. The noise of the gym faded into nothing. For a moment, it was just her breath on my neck and her heart against mine. I left without another word to Shannon. I didn't need one. That night, I placed the school flyer carefully on the counter, circled the next date. The lawyer's office was tucked into a quiet strip of buildings beside a pharmacy and a florist, the kind of place people passed without noticing. That suited me just fine. His name was James Alcott. He wore a navy tie and thin glasses and didn't speak unless something needed to be said. I liked him immediately. He read through my original will, made a few quiet notes, then slid the papers aside and waited. "I want to remove 2 names," I told him. My son and his wife. He didn't ask why. Just nodded. I gave him the new instructions. A trust, not just a lump sum, but something thoughtful. Money for education. A reserve for health care. Protection for the house should anything happen. I gave him June's full name spelled carefully, including her middle name, the same as mine. He looked up once. "Do you want to inform them?" "No," I said. "This is for me." He slid the new copies across the desk for me to sign. The pen didn't shake in my hand. Not once. That evening, I labeled the folder in block letters. Final copy. Private. I tucked it between my old recipe books, the ones I knew Shannon never looked at. I didn't tell anyone. Carol called the next day, part of her usual check-in. She never stayed long, never overstepped. But that day, after a brief chat about prescriptions and groceries, she lingered by the door. "I've had a lot of cases," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "But very few where someone got out before it was too late." I met her eyes. "I didn't get out," I said. "I walked out." She didn't smile, but she nodded like she understood the difference. After she left, I made a pot of tea and sat by the window. The mail sat unopened beside me, but I already knew what was inside another letter from the bank confirming my name alone. I reached for the scissors and began opening envelopes, one clean line at a time. It was a Tuesday when she came back, same car, same impatient knock, but this time her voice was syrupy. "The electric bill's overdue," Shannon said as soon as I opened the door. I saw the envelope. "You need help, don't you?" I didn't step aside. I just looked at her for a moment, then gestured toward the dining room. She followed my glance and stopped. There was a man at the table. Not Carol this time. A different kind of presence. Calm, broad-shouldered, and wearing a local sheriff's department badge. Officer Briggs had been thorough on the phone, polite but firm. Shannon blinked. "Who's that Officer Briggs?" I said, my voice even. "He's helping me go over some bank records. There were a few withdrawals I didn't authorize." She stiffened. You can't be serious." I stepped back and motioned toward the chair across from him. "Would you like to sit?" She didn't move. Her eyes kept darting between me and the officer, scanning the room, like she was trying to decide if this was real. "Lorene," she started, voice low, "what are you doing?" I returned to the table, lifted my teacup, and took a slow sip. "I'm answering questions." The officer said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence did the work for him. Shannon's face flushed, then drained. "I have nothing to do with any of that," she snapped. "Then there's no need to worry," I said gently. She didn't sit. She turned and walked out her shoes, striking the floor sharper than usual. I waited until the door closed behind her before setting my cup back on its saucer. Officer Briggs opened his folder. That was informative. "I thought it might be," I said. He made a note, then paused. "We'll move forward." Quietly. I nodded. That's how I prefer things now. As he gathered his materials, I stood and walked him to the door. The porch light had just flickered on. The sun was setting behind the houses across the street. I watched until his car turned the corner, then locked the door. From the inside, I started with marigolds. Bright ones, the kind that catch sunlight even in the late afternoon. I lined them along the walkway, digging into the cool dirt with slow, deliberate hands. It felt good to plant something that wasn't going to take more than it gave. After that, I swept the porch. I took my time with the corners where dust likes to gather unnoticed. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought a new lock for the mailbox. Stronger. I had the clerk test the key before I left. At home, I threw out the old welcome mat. The new one had words printed in bold, "No soliciting." No surprises. It made me smile when I stepped over it. June comes by more often now. After school, she drops her backpack by the front door and asks what we're making today. Lately, it's been muffins banana cinnamon, once even peach. No one hides notes in the batter. No one counts what's in my wallet while I'm distracted. We talk about school. Her teacher who smells like peppermint, a girl who tattles too much, a science project involving celery and colored water. I listen, that's all. It's more than enough. One afternoon, as we're pulling a tray of muffins from the oven, June glances up. "Did you always live alone, Grandma?" I pause, reaching for a dish towel. "I used to live around people I say. That's different." She doesn't ask what I mean. She nods like she already knows. We clean up in comfortable silence. I don't rush it. Later, when she's gone and the house is quiet again, I sit by the window that faces the garden. The marigolds are catching the last light of day, their petals warm and bold. I think about how silence used to feel like punishment, like something pressed onto me. Now it's just quiet. No footsteps I don't trust. No voices behind doors. No demands tucked into casual greetings. Just me. A cup of tea. A garden taking root. And the slow, steady breath of a house learning how to exhale. I set the table early, before the sun had fully cleared the trees. Plain white dishes, paper napkins folded in half fruit from the backyard arranged in a small bowl. Nothing fancy. Nothing loud. Just enough for three. Elise arrived, first humming as she hung her cardigan over the back of the chair. June came a few minutes later, holding a small paper bag she'd decorated with markers. "It's a gift," she said. "But you can't open it until after pancakes." I smiled and nodded. After pancakes then. It wasn't much of a birthday, not by anyone else's standards. No candles, no banner, no photos posed for people who would rather not be there. Just the sound of forks against plates and the smell of coffee, strong enough to feel alive again. We talked about the garden, the marigolds that had finally taken to the soil, about Elise's neighbor, who still forgot to bring his trash cans in on time. June told us she got an A on her science project. She showed me a small blue ribbon folded into her pocket, like a secret. Halfway through breakfast, the doorbell rang. Elise glanced at me, but I was already standing. Through the window, I saw Kyle. No flowers, no gift. Just him looking older than I remembered, his hands empty. I opened the door a few inches. I just wanted to say, he began, but his voice trailed off. Not today, I said softly. His shoulders sank. He nodded once and stepped back. I closed the door not to shut him out, but to keep the air inside still and calm. When I turned around, June was pouring juice into my glass. Did we miss anything, she asked. Nothing at all, I said, sitting back down. We started already. The rest of the morning passed in easy conversation. When the plates were cleared and the kitchen quiet again, I carried the bowl of fruit to the sink and let the sunlight spill across the counter. The house stayed warm, steady, and mine.